A floating bunk bed needs to have three things in my opinion. First, it needs to appear floating with minimal supports. Second, it needs to look good, so in this case real wood that is stained. And third, you shouldn't be able to visibly see any attachment points or screw holes. So this is how I did it. I have no shop and I'm building this on my garage floor, so I believe that anybody watching can do this project. I start by cutting and attaching the frame using 3/4 by 7¼ inch poplar in the following orientation to minimize visible joints after being attached to the wall. I am using the Craig pocket hole jig to hide all my attachments. There's no fancy shop equipment here. You need to make sure you use wood glue on the joints, and I am also using a brad nailer to hold all the pieces in place to prevent movement before I screw it together. Next, I cut the supports for the top bunk that will be visible from the bottom bunk looking up. These are 3/4 inch by 2½ inches wide, and here I'm spacing the supports out evenly across the frame. And I slightly ease the edges with sandpaper to make the corners not so sharp. I again apply wood glue to all the connections and use the brad nailer to hold these pieces in place before screwing together. Now I screw in all the pocket holes with a 1¼ inch Craig screw because of the 3/4 inch thickness that we're dealing with. I also needed to add some additional pocket holes on the ends. I wanted to test the weight, so I laid down on it and made sure everything was good to go. Next, I ripped down a 1/4 inch piece of poplar plywood to fit inside the frame and trim the edges to get a tight fit. Once it fits snug, glue the tops of all the supports. Lay the 1/4 inch plywood inside and weight it down and shoot some brad nails at an angle so none of them come out the other side. Now start on the bottom frame. For this one, I use a less expensive 3/4 by 5½ inch pine material that will remain unfinished. I'm able to screw the one side together without pocket holes because this side is going to actually be attached to the wall when finished. You want to pre-drill with a countersink bit and drive the screws in. The other side will be exposed from the room, so I'm going to need to use the Craig jig to create pocket holes to hide all my screw attachments. Next, we need to rip down the top guardrail. This is going to be 3 inches wide. I will also cut 2 legs that come down 15 inches. So one of them will be in the middle and one of them will be on the end. The one on the end I miter with a 45-degree cut, and I am making a pocket hole connection with glue to make it strong. Clamp it down and let it dry up. Now we need to lay out the ladder supports on the support leg of the bunk bed. They are spaced out 12 inches apart from each other with a total of 6 from the ground all the way to the top. Make sure they line up exactly across from each other when you're laying these out. Drill these with a mortise bit, or in my case a 3/4 inch paddle bit, and only go down about 1/2 inch into the material because you don't want to blow out the other side. Sand down all the edges and make sure the one exposed butt joint is sanded down well. Also grab the guardrail and sand those joints as well to make it all smooth and flush. I stain these frames with a Minwax dark walnut color, and I used a brush to spread it out as evenly as possible and then came back and wiped it down with a rag. You can apply multiple coats if you want it darker, but I just applied one coat to everything on this project. One thing to note is that where I had exposed pocket hole screws, for example along the guardrail, I was able to fill them with wood plugs to fill the pocket holes. I sanded them down flush and then they were ready to stain. I also stained a couple of extra pieces because I didn't know if I was going to need to use them in between the ladder supports when assembling. So I recruited some friends of mine to come over and help me spray these pieces with a lacquer finish. Lacquer is much tougher than polyurethane finishes, but if you wanted to, you could brush on a polyurethane finish and get a nice look too. They just wear out a little bit quicker. We coated these pieces 3 different times, sanding with 320 or 400 grit sandpaper in between coats. Make sure you wipe off the dust from sanding before coating again. After the 3rd coat, I let the pieces sit for a day to dry out completely. Almost done. Now it's time to assemble the pieces. I needed a way to support the bottom frame off the floor without a bunch of help, so I cut some 2x4 blocks and set them on the ground to the proper height I wanted to be able to fit some storage bins underneath. Once supported, I was able to find the studs in the wall with a magnetic stud finder and then attach the frame into the wall in a few locations, making sure everything was level from one side to the other. Next, I attached some more 2x4 blocks to the bottom height of the top bunk, making sure these supports were level with each other as well. I got ready to lift up the top bunk, recruited my pregnant wife, and with the help of a temp support leg, we could stand back and see if it was too high or not. Unfortunately, it was too high, so we took it back down. I adjusted the blocks in the wall just a little bit, and once we were ready to go, I lifted the frame back into place. We double checked that the height was good, and then I started to shim and level off the blocks underneath to get it right on the money. I found the studs again, attached the frame with two 3.5-inch deck screws into every other stud. Next, I brought in the support leg and checked the heights to confirm before attaching. It was a good thing to confirm because I needed to cut down the leg a little bit to make sure the guardrail wasn't too high. I really didn't want my kid falling through these in the middle of the night. The final measurement from the floor to the top of the guardrail was 77.5 inches. I clamped the top frame and plumbed up the support leg and then clamped the bottom frame. Once those were tight, I clamped the guardrail section and was ready to attach into the frame. I did this from the inside, countersinking my screws and only using 1 1/4-inch screws to prevent blowouts on the other side. I used 3 screws in the top and bottom frames and 2 screws for each support leg of the guardrail. You can use more, I would not use less. It was a good test being on the top bunk, trusting in the glued pocket hold connections. Once I got the support leg and guardrail attached, I removed all the clamps and started working on the ladder. I want to make a note that I am using 3/4-inch spindles for the ladder, but I wish I would have went with 1-inch or 1 1/4-inch spindles for more support when daddy climbs up into the bed to tell stories and sing songs for bedtime. The skinnier rods or skinnier spindles are just a little bit tougher on the feet. I dry fit the spindles in place to make sure everything lines up and is level with the ground from side to side. Once everything checks out, I remove the clamps and get ready to brad nail and glue the spindles in place. I only put 1 brad nail in just to hold it tight while the glue sets up. Once I get the spindles all in place, I line it up with the other side and put them all into the holes. I wipe up any glue that squeezed out with a rag and then clamp the left ladder leg to the main support leg using 2 clamps opposing each other. After I got the bottom support leg attached, I clamped the top together in the same manner and screwed the top bunk frame to the support leg. I used 2 screws that are 1 1/4-inch long to make sure these connections were good and tight. Once I had the top and bottom attached, I then clamped the middle to let it set up for a few hours until removing everything. This is the amazing floating bunk bed. If I missed anything, please let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. If you want to see a demo on the pocket jig I used for this project, check out the video on the right.